The Braves won 14 straight NL East titles from 1991 to 2005, due in large part to their starting pitching. Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and John Smoltz, you've probably heard of them if you're watching this. In fact, you may have even heard them compared to Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, and Freddie Peralta a couple years ago. Well, Corbin Burns is now in Baltimore, Brandon Woodruff is on the injured list, and Freddie Peralta is no longer the pitcher he was before. But one guy you probably haven't heard of from that Braves team is Leo Mazzone. Mazzone was the pitching coach of that team and was considered one of the greatest pitching coaches of all time. He always said that he felt sharpest when he was throwing on 3 days rest in a rotation, but he bumped his guys up to 4 days rest or a typical 5-man rotation in order to keep them healthier. And the Brewers are a team that should consider whether they should have a 5-man rotation or a 6-man rotation with the way modern baseball is. Right now, they have Freddie Peralta, Colin Ray, Aaron Civale, Frankie Montas, and Tobias Myers making regular starts, and they even had DL Hall mixed in. But should the Brewers have a 6-man rotation to keep them fresh, or should they go with a 5-man rotation so they're pitching a little bit more frequently and maybe sharper when they are starting? Conventional wisdom would say the Brewers should go to a 6-man rotation to preserve the health of the starting pitchers and their effectiveness down the stretch as we head into the playoffs. Any Brewers fan who's old enough and has been following since 2011 remembers Sean Markham or Randy Wolf in the 2011 playoffs. It wasn't a pretty sight, and it may be partly because they were overworked. Well, right now, you don't want to have Colin Ray or Freddie Peralta go into the playoffs not being their best version of themselves, considering the Brewers are already pretty thin in the starting pitching department. With that being said, the Brewers may not want to go to a 6-man rotation in order to keep their starters fresh. Most starters actually tend to be a little bit better on 5 full days of rest, meaning a 6-man rotation, or even more, but the Brewers starters aren't necessarily that way. Freddie Peralta is a guy who, on 4 days rest throughout his career, has a 3.75 ERA, 11.2 strikeouts per 9, which is pretty similar to the other markers, but his ERA gradually gets higher the more rest he has. Colin Ray is another guy who's been better on 4 days rest than he is on 5 days rest, throwing to a 3.53 ERA when making starts on 4 days rest in his career versus 5.77 when throwing on 5 days rest, which would be a typical 6-man rotation. The Brewers could manage their innings better, and I think that's the route the Brewers should go. They have a deep bullpen with a lot of length that they can be provided with. Bryce Wilson and Joe Ross are kind of traditional longmen in that they can go 3 or 4 innings out of the bullpen. Nick Mears has gone multiple innings at times this year. Jared Koenig has done that. Brian Hudson. You don't want to overwork them, but you also want to maybe rely on them to kind of ease the load off the starting pitchers. And so right now it might seem like it makes sense to have DL Hall be a 6th starter, but I think right now it actually makes more sense to spread out the innings a little bit more evenly among the starters and the relievers. Well, it might be the perfect mix of keeping pitchers fresh while keeping them sharp. It also can prepare the Brewers for the playoffs, since in the playoffs they're not going to be having Colin Ray go 6 or 7 innings, but they might be having Jared Koenig come in the 3rd or 4th inning. So by using pitchers in that role right now, they could be keeping the Brewers pitchers more effective right now, preparing them for the playoffs, and keeping them more effective when they get to the postseason. The Brewers need to keep their starting pitchers healthy for the postseason, but I think the best way to do that is not with a 6-man rotation. It's by managing their innings a little bit more during their starts, by having them go maybe shorter outings and preparing them for the postseason that way.